Joining us now is State Representative Ryan Berman, representing Michigan's 39th Congressional District in the state of Michigan. Joining us on the MegaCast, Representative Berman, thank you for being with us again.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate having you on. So you recently there was a bill that you introduced with State Representative Karen Whitsitt to extend the statute of limitations for victims of abuse by physicians. Of course, this was in light of the settlement that was made between the University of Michigan and the victims of Dr. Robert Anderson under its supervision, of course, as well, thinking of the victims of Larry Nassar at Michigan State University as well. Talk about you and Representative Whitsitt, who is a Democrat, coming together on this bipartisan bill to support victims of abuse from physicians here in the state of Michigan in the future, in light of what we've learned over the years past with the situation at the University of Michigan and at Michigan State University.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this package of bills, like all my major legislation, I try to focus on putting people over politics, right? I'm probably one of the most bipartisan, if not the most bipartisan, Republican representative in the state House, having co-sponsors on bills of both parties, Republicans and Democrats. And this is no different. This is something that shouldn't be partisan at all, right? And we introduced this package of a two-bill package of empowering survivors legislation last session, and that was with COVID and everything else going on, referred to the Judiciary Committee, one of the most busiest committees there was, and it really didn't go anywhere, unfortunately, with the time frame. We were both fortunate to be reelected coming in, and it's again one of the top priorities in ensuring that victims, survivors have proper recourse and redress for the wrongs that were committed against them, their opportunity to get it to court. So we reintroduced this package, these two bills. They were referred to the Oversight Committee, which typically isn't as busy as the Judiciary, which every facet of laws, obviously making laws, Judiciary has a big effect on that. But Oversight has been very overwhelmed in itself, busy committee, but we've got hearings on them. We had hearings back in September, I believe, and trying to schedule another hearing. A lot of people wanted to testify. You know, you only get about an hour and a half max for a committee hearing. So, and you have people from all around the country where this ends up affecting, and we saw what happened, especially with the Dr. Robert Anderson survivors, of just how many of them there are, right? Something like 400, 500 people that have come forward. So the next scheduled hearings are actually set for next week, the beginning of February. Now that there has been a settlement in the U of M, the U of M litigation, which this really was brought forward to address, but it goes beyond that. The question is, hey, are you still moving forward to these packages? And the answer is absolutely. So, I think now more than ever that we need to change our laws. And the two bills in the package, my bill dealt with the issue of government immunity and some of these predators hiding behind that shield of governmental immunity if, when they were doing this type of abuse, they were in a governmental agency as an agent of the state. So what my bill does is says, in regardless of what happened in the past, moving forward, hey, if you're an agent, if you're a governmental entity or an agent of that government, you cannot stand behind that shield of immunity. If you knew that if there was abuse in the past and you failed to prevent any further abuse. Basically what happened in the Nassar, what happened in Anderson, what happens all over the place where people maybe turn a blind eye and let this problem continue to happen when there's sufficient notice or allegations that something has transpired. Because we don't want somebody turning a blind eye. We don't want this happening again. We don't want not only one victim, but multiple victims to be victimized and that perpetrator to be shielded, or that entity that allowed it to happen to escape unpunished, if you will. without any type of civil redress because of our immunity laws. So my bill going forward was always from this point, it did have a retroactive application, but more for the future. Rep. Whitsett's bill does deal with the statute of limitations, makes a change. The most important part of that bill was opening up a 1-year window opportunity for those who were victims in the past to then bring their claims forward in court without having to deal with statute of limitations defenses. Now that the U of M scandal at Robert Anderson, it seems like that's being settled. I heard that the next day there was another lawsuit filed in federal court, someone who wasn't part of that initial class. So it still will help that in those situations, but others, and also moving forward, adjusting our statute of limitations period here in Michigan with how many years you have to then file a claim once you have reason to know of an injury.
And that statute of limitations is vitally important for victims of sexual abuse who in many cases, because of the trauma of the situation that they've undergone, because of the people that often are perpetrating this abuse being in positions of power, either as someone's direct physician or, as you said, as an agent of government or as someone that's affiliated with an agency of government. And so they don't come forward sometimes for many years. And expanding that statute of limitations helps the victims if and when they do reach that point, that they can still have justice accounted for in their situation, and that they can still assure and work with the state and work with law enforcement to assure that those that are responsible for that abuse are held accountable. And on top of that, in your case, and on your side of the bill, holds those accountable in positions of power that are supported by our government and doesn't protect them from their own crimes, from their own atrocities in the future. So that's really good to hear. We're joined by Representative Ryan Berman, a Republican from the 39th District here in the state of Michigan. Other legislation you've introduced in the recent past, last October, you had helped pass a bill in the Michigan House. It was Bill 5007 that would eliminate the $10 fee on state personal identification cards for Michigan residents. It would allow same-day appointment making and priority for those looking to get a state ID. It ultimately did pass, but then was vetoed by the governor. Your reaction first to her veto of that bill, and then secondly, the motivation behind putting that bill through as a way to help Michiganders who are seeking an ID card get an ID card.
Yeah, so, the first is that if you can't, an ID is it's $10, and you need an ID for pretty much anything you do in our society. Opening a bank account, driving, a driver's license, but ordering a drink. You need to prove your identity, prove your age. When you're talking about government and whether you believe in smaller government, limited government, the government purpose, agencies, one of the most basic fundamental things a government can do is verify somebody's identity and give them an identification. So if you can't afford an ID, I think we all pay taxes. Our tax money goes in all types of programs, resources, grants, administrating all types of departments, and we give millions of dollars to the Secretary of State's office through our tax money. How come, if we're already paying for those services, how come we're paying again to get those IDs? That's kind of what I thought of, hey, if the government's going to do anything with our tax money, it should be providing this necessary service that everybody needs. And yeah, maybe it's just $10, but one of the things is not everybody can afford it is something that I've heard. Well, if you can't afford an ID right now, you have to actually come up with more paperwork. And it's, again, a stigma associated with that, where if you feel embarrassed or maybe it prevents somebody. I want to make government accessible and easy to transact with for all residents. So I think one of those barriers to remove is that fee. So it was a good idea, something on my part that I put it forward. I got Rep. Jim Ellison, representative from the Royal Oak area. Again, most of my legislation, before I submit it, I'll at least go over, talk to a couple of my Democrat colleagues, get somebody to co-sponsor it, showing, hey, this is an idea that both parties can get behind, especially when you're in divided government, ultimately landing on the governor's desk. So he co-sponsored that. It went forward. And then with some other bills in the House, when they were addressing elections and election improvements, they brought up the showing an ID to vote. So right now, you have to show your ID to vote. If you don't have an ID to vote, you fill out an affidavit saying you are who you are. Other states, it's kind of easy. There's an issue. A lot of people have issue with it, but they brought up these bills, and especially for absentee ballots, showing an ID. And if you don't show your ID, then you get a provisional ballot, and then you have X amount of days, I think a week later, to cure that, bring in your actual ID, and then they will have your provisional ballot counted as a real ballot. If you fail to prove who you actually are with that, then that provisional ballot doesn't get counted. So those two bills went through and made their way through the Senate and the House. And my House bill, they ended up bringing up with it because one of the attacks on those bills was that it's not that easy for everybody in our society to grab an ID. Well, they saw that I had that bill submitted that makes it easier for people to get an ID, and they brought that bill up with those other two voting bills. When that happened, it became a partisan issue, which I still don't understand why it's a partisan thing, showing an ID to vote. But every single Democrat voted against those two bills. My bill was brought up with it, so they all voted against mine, including my co-sponsor, unfortunately. It went to the governor's desk, and she vetoed it.
We're joined by Representative Ryan Berman, representing Michigan's 39th district on the MegaCast. For those that weren't aware, you announced previously your desire to seek the position of Attorney General in the next election that will be coming up this November. Tell us why you considered seeking that role and what difference you would intend to be making as the Attorney General of the state of Michigan should you be elected.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm now serving, as you know, my second term in the House. Before that, I was private practice as an attorney, general practice, representing a lot of small businesses as their general counsel, doing both the civil side and also criminal side, criminal defense. But I have an extensive background in law enforcement, working in the community as a reserve deputy, reserve police officer in Sylvan Lake. I was a special prosecutor, firearms instructor, use of force instructor, very broad background in law enforcement, in the private sector in law, now in the public sector as a state representative, again, bipartisan, reaching across the aisle. My background really, is the background of someone that you want as our Attorney General. And Dana Nessel, there's a lot of criticisms of what she has done or what she hasn't done in office, including, giving her other colleagues, Gretchen Whitmer, Jocelyn Benson, being very hyper partisan, whether it's, having a D next to your name kind of gives them an easy out. Lots of examples, but what I want to do is I don't care if you have a D or an R next to your name. I'm going to treat everybody the same. You shouldn't be afraid. Nobody should be afraid of being investigated by the Attorney General just because you have a D or an R next to your name. The only people that should be afraid of the Attorney General are criminals, real criminals. And so I'm looking to take that office and bring integrity and accountability and transparency back, and not have political prosecutions or type of, partisanship that this office really has seen.
Representative Berman, just another couple minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. In the meantime, just want to get one more update on the work that you've been doing out in Lansing. Any other bills that you're currently working on at this time in your Republican caucus and a bipartisan nature that people may be seeing come on the docket here in the near future?
Yeah, you know what? A lot of my bills, again, are kind of, to me, they're common sense measures, but trying to make the government more transparent and accountable to the people. It's things of getting and using technology, getting online easy access to court records. I think I've talked about that one before, that's sitting in the Senate. I have a lot of bills that have passed the House, including expanding our Freedom of Information Act to the legislative branch. So I was the lead sponsor of the Legislative Open Records Act, expanding FOIA passed the House last term, sat in the Senate, just passed the House this term, sitting in the Senate. Have a lot of bills, some criminal justice issues, decriminalizing some things, updating our laws, things that I've seen in private practice or as a reserve police officer that really didn't make sense, things that we need to clean up. And I think the majority of my bills have passed the House now, and now it's really to get the Senate to move on them. They're a little slower over there. I think maybe we'll have to ask Senator Runstead what's going on that side. But, all my bills sponsored, you can go to the Michigan legislature, go to the website. I think it's michiganlegislature.gov. I believe, and just search. You can search by bills, by sponsor. You can look me up to see those bills and see the status of them on the website. But you can always contact me, anybody listening in the area. My office is very open, accessible, as I am myself personally. So you can reach out and email, call my office. We'll get back to you on any type of issues. Really dealing with a lot of things over in the past with our constituents, with unemployment has been a huge one, of helping people with their claims, getting their money. And now with the administration is trying to claw back and get money, saying that they've overpaid people. That's an issue now due to their own mistakes. And that's a bill that's actually going to come up this week, sponsored by Rep. DeMoose, to try to clear that problem, because I know a lot of constituents are and have been affected by that.
Representative Berman, thank you very much for joining us, telling us more about some of your very important bipartisan legislation that will help victims of sexual abuse here in our state of Michigan, and other things that you're working on there in Lansing. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.